She handed him the black card with trembling fingers, not out of pride, but surrender. "I don't have time," she whispered. He didn't ask why. He just took her hand. And that moment changed everything. If you believe in quiet miracles in love that heals what medicine can't, and in ordinary people doing the extraordinary, this story was meant for you. Stay with us until the end. And if you haven't already, consider subscribing, not just for a story, but for the feeling it might leave behind. Now let me take you back to the night he almost didn't stop. The marble floor of Temple Biotech's lobby gleamed like a mirror beneath the morning sun, each polished tile reflecting the silhouettes of a dozen moving suits. The space buzzed with quiet urgency. Designer heels clicked, lattes steamed in paper cups, and voices murmured through Bluetooth earpieces. It was another Monday at one of the most prestigious biotech firms in the country, where appearances were curated and every second accounted for. Colton Blake didn't belong in that world. Wearing a faded gray maintenance uniform and boots that had seen better decades, he pushed a mop bucket across the lobby, careful not to drip too close to the executives weaving through. He kept his head down, his long, sun-streaked hair tied back loosely, the lines around his eyes more from fatigue than age. With one hand on the mop handle, the other carried a small plastic lunch bag inside a peanut butter sandwich and a note in crayon, "For Daddy. Love him." It had been 3 years since Colton lost his wife. Since then, he'd traded his combat boots for a janitor's cart and his past as an army medic for quiet nights, helping his daughter sleep through panic attacks. He liked this job. It was predictable. Clean up spills. Don't ask questions. Stay invisible. That illusion shattered at 8:43 a.m. A soft thud echoed through the lobby. Some heads turned. Most didn't. Colton looked up, his instincts prickling. Then came the second thud, louder, followed by the sharp clatter of a leather purse hitting tile. He dropped the mop. In the middle of the lobby, a woman in a navy silk suit lay crumpled near the central water feature. She wasn't moving. People froze. No one stepped forward. "Is that someone?" whispered. Bethany Lang, another voice hissed. The CEO of Temple Biotech. The woman who hadn't made a public appearance in 6 months. The face of power strategy and ruthless innovation. And now face down on the cold lobby floor. Colton didn't hesitate. He weaved through the onlookers, dropping to his knees beside her. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" he asked, gently turning her over. Her skin was pale lips tinged with blue. Shallow breathing. Faint pulse. A tremor ran through her hands. "Someone call 911, Colton barked without looking up. Now, he leaned in, checking her pupils. Uneven dilation. He loosened the silk scarf at her throat and elevated her legs with his folded jacket. She was going into neurogenic shock and fast. Still, no one moved. "She's dying," a woman near the reception desk murmured, horror spreading across her face. Colton narrowed his eyes. "Then let her die in peace, or help me save her? Your choice." That got one executive to finally pull out his phone. The rest just watched. The ambulance took 7 minutes to arrive. Colton never left her side. When the EMTs loaded her onto the stretcher, she stirred, barely conscious, and clutched Colton's wrist with surprising strength. Her voice was brittle but urgent. "Take it." From inside her jacket pocket, she pulled out a thin, matte black card. Unmarked. Heavy. Colton frowned. "Ma'am, take it," she insisted. "If I don't make it, you'll know what to do." Then her hand went limp. That night, Colton sat in the kitchen of his small log home, tucked in the Vermont foothills, staring at the card as if it might explode. A single lamp illuminated the room, casting warm light on the pine walls and the watercolor paintings Emma had taped everywhere, sunflowers, animals, and one of the two of them holding hands under a sky that was far too blue for real life. Emma sat at the table across from him, her small frame bundled in an oversized sweatshirt, chewing quietly on a peanut butter cookie. "You okay, Daddy?" she asked, voice gentle, unsure. Colton looked up and forced a smile. "Yeah, baby. Just had a weird day." He didn't tell her what he'd seen, what it felt like to hold a stranger's life in his hands again, that old hum of adrenaline he hadn't felt since the field hospitals overseas. But it hadn't been the same. This time, it shook something loose inside him. He turned the card over again. No name, no logo, just cold, silent weight. What kind of person carries a black card with no identity, and why give it to a janitor? Colton slipped it into a drawer, shut it with a quiet thud, and leaned back in his chair. Outside the window, snow began to fall soft, patient flakes blanketing the dark world in silence. He didn't know yet that that moment, a simple act of instinct would unravel everything he thought he understood about love, identity, and healing. And that for once, he wouldn't be the one saving someone else. He'd be the cure someone powerful had never known she needed. Colton arrived at Temple General Hospital the next morning with a paper bag in hand. Inside was a thermos of chamomile tea, a honey biscuit wrapped in foil, and a napkin with a hand-drawn heart, courtesy of Emma. She'd insisted on including it. In case the lady wakes up and doesn't know someone cares, she'd whispered eyes wide with solemn wisdom far beyond her 8 years. He didn't tell her the woman in question was one of the richest and most powerful CEOs in the country, or that she hadn't woken up at all. The hospital receptionist eyed his uniform but didn't question him when he mentioned he was checking on the woman from Temple Plaza. Perhaps the city had already heard of the collapse. Perhaps the black card he flashed helped more than he realized. Room 602 was quiet, dimly lit, and cold in that particular way hospitals always were. Machines beeped in soft intervals. Tubes ran like lifelines from the woman in the bed to the technology around her. Bethany Lang looked small there, shrunk, fragile. So much for the woman whose name had commanded headlines. Without her power suit and press presence, she looked no different than anyone else facing their own mortality. Colton stood by the doorway, unsure if he should step closer. Then he saw her hand, limp IV lines, snaking under pale skin, and he remembered the way she had clutched his wrist the day before. Fiercely, purposefully. He walked in. He set the bag down gently on the bedside table, then sat in the chair across from her. No one else was there. No flowers, no cards, no family, just Bethany and the machines. He cleared his throat awkwardly. "I brought tea. Thought maybe. I don't know. It'd be nice if you woke up to something normal." She didn't stir. He sighed and leaned back, running a hand down his face. "I'm Colton Blake," he said after a moment. "You probably don't remember, but I was the guy mopping your floor when you decided to scare the hell out of everyone yesterday." Still silence. He stared at the card still in his coat pocket. The weight of it hadn't left him. Not physically. Not emotionally. It burned like a question he didn't know how to answer. "I don't know why you gave me that card," he said quietly. "But I'm not someone important. I fix things. I mop floors. I raise a little girl who still thinks putting peanut butter on spaghetti is gourmet." His voice faltered, gentled. "I used to be a medic in Afghanistan. 10 years. I've held the hands of dying men talk to boys younger than me who didn't know they were already gone. And when my wife passed, I promised myself Emma would grow up never feeling like no one was watching out for her. That's all I've done since. Watch out." He looked up at her then. "But I wasn't watching out for you. You just fell." Later that day, Colton walked the hospital corridors restless. Something gnawed at him, a quiet unease, a feeling that went beyond empathy. The way she had looked at him, the urgency of her voice, the deliberate way she pressed the card into his hand. He stopped by the nurse's station. Bethany Lang, he asked. Does she have any listed emergency contacts? The nurse glanced up from her chart, then lowered her voice. She came in alone. No family. No personal info filed. But the attending physician said she refused a private wing, told them to leave her where they'd put anyone else. Odd given who she is. Colton frowned. You're sure she has no one? The nurse hesitated, then offered. Some people, even powerful ones. They die alone, Mr. Blake. You'd be surprised how often it happens. He left in silence. That evening back home, Colton sat on the porch, with Emma curled up in a blanket next to him, her head resting on his arm. The sky above was a deep violet. Crickets sang. A slow wind carried the smell of pine and wood smoke. She's still sleeping? Emma asked softly. He nodded. Yeah. Did she say anything? He paused. She gave me a card. A strange one. Emma blinked. Like a birthday card. No, he said with a wry smile. Like one of those cards that gets you into places normal people aren't supposed to go. Emma was quiet for a while. Then she said, Maybe you were supposed to be the normal person in her story. He turned to look at her, surprised. She shrugged. Mom said sometimes, we're the miracle someone else didn't know they needed. He didn't answer. But when he went inside that night, he took the black card out of the drawer and placed it on the table. Then he made a decision. The next morning, Colton returned to room 602 with a fold-up chair, a crossword book, and a fresh thermos of tea. He sat there beside her wordlessly. When nurses came and went, he nodded. When they asked who he was, he just said, a friend. And when the sun hit her face just right, he noticed something different, a flicker beneath the eyelids, a tiny shift in her lips. He leaned forward. Bethany, he whispered. Her eyelids twitched. Then slowly, painfully, they opened. She blinked once, twice. Her gaze was unfocused at first, but then it settled on him. She spoke hoarse but clear enough. You stayed. Colton swallowed hard. Of course I did. And for the first time she smiled. It was small, fleeting, but it was there, like the sun catching the edge of a long, frozen river, hinting at the thaw to come. Bethany Lang stood at the threshold of Colton Blake's modest cabin, like a stranger, unsure if she belonged in the scene unfolding before her. The house was nestled deep in the Vermont woods, just outside the town of Hardwick. It wasn't large. 2 bedrooms, a porch that creaked when the wind was strong, and a chimney that exhaled wood smoke with gentle purpose. The driveway was still gravel, and the mailbox leaned like it had seen one too many winters. Bethany had seen a lot in her life: boardrooms, jet cabins, research labs, and corner offices with skyline views. But this was foreign land. Inside, Colton moved with practiced ease. He placed her overnight bag by the couch, then walked into the kitchen where a kettle was whistling. His sleeves were rolled up, revealing forearms dusted with old scars and calluses. The scent of something earthy sage maybe clung to the air. Emma peeked around the hallway wide-eyed. Colton motioned gently. Emma, this is Miss Bethany. She's staying for a little while. Bethany offered a small smile and knelt slightly. Hi there. Emma didn't answer, but after a long moment she walked up and held out a drawing, a house with a tree and 3 stick figures. It was childlike, but detailed enough to show Bethany standing beside them. Bethany's heart twisted. Colton stepped in to translate the silence. That means she's okay with you being here. Bethany looked at the paper. That's more welcome than I've gotten in years. That night, dinner was roasted vegetables and cornbread. Colton cooked without saying much. Bethany ate slowly, still unused to her own appetite returning. Emma sat beside her humming softly, while drawing another picture this time, with a dog added to the family. Afterward, Colton showed Bethany to the spare bedroom. It was clean, sparse, and smelled faintly of cedar. A quilt folded at the end of the bed was patched in places, not elegant, but soft. Lived in. "I'll give you space," Colton said, his voice low. "Bathroom's down the hall. Hot water if the heater cooperates." She nodded. "Thank you." Then he hesitated. "You didn't have to say yes, you know." Bethany turned, hand still on the doorknob. "I didn't say yes because I needed saving, Colton. I said yes because I needed to remember what it felt like to be seen, without being studied." He didn't reply, but there was something in his expression, a quiet understanding, like two veterans recognizing the same ghost in each other. The days that followed moved differently, like slow water rather than time. In the city, Bethany had filled her calendar in 5-minute increments. Now hours passed, unmeasured. She woke to the sound of birds and the occasional thud of Emma running down the hall. She learned that Colton read novels out loud to his daughter every night, and that their Friday dinner was always pancakes because the week deserved something silly. She learned how to split logs, how to repair a squeaky door hinge, and how to eat breakfast without checking emails. More surprising than the calm was how quickly her body responded. The tremors in her hands eased. Her sleep deepened. Her breath came easier in the morning. No medications had changed. No treatments had been added. Just peace and presence. One evening, as dusk painted the trees in lavender and gold, Bethany sat on the porch steps, wrapped in an old flannel blanket. Colton emerged with 2 mugs of tea and handed her one. She accepted it wordlessly, watching the steam curl upward. "You always bring tea," she said after a minute. "Habit," he replied. "My wife used to say tea was how you told the world to slow down. She sounds wise." She was. Bethany looked at him. What happened to her? Colton didn't flinch. "Leukemia. It was fast. Emma was 5. Bethany whispered, "I'm sorry." He nodded once. "Me too." Silence stretched comfortably between them. Then Bethany asked, "Do you think it's possible to build a life from scratch? Like, not a new chapter, but a new book?" Colton sipped his tea. "If you've still got breath, you've still got ink." Bethany smiled softly at that. That weekend, Bethany offered to cook. Colton raised an eyebrow, but said nothing. Emma helped slice carrots, while Bethany navigated the unfamiliar kitchen with surprising grace. Dinner was simple. Chicken stew warm rolls, and a blueberry crumble that didn't quite set right, but still tasted like summer. Afterward, they all sat around the fireplace. Emma curled in her father's lap, eyes half closed, content. Bethany sat across from them, legs tucked beneath her mug in hand. Colton looked over. "What were you like before Temple?" Bethany tilted her head. "Smaller." He waited. "I grew up poor," she said finally. "Rust Belt town in Ohio. Mom worked night shifts. I studied by lamplight. Got a scholarship, then another, then another. Built Temple from a folding table in my dorm room. And after that, I built a fortress," she said simply. "High walls, iron doors. I locked out everything, including people, even myself." Colton nodded slowly. "It takes a lot of strength to build a fortress, more to leave one behind." Bethany met his gaze. "I think I'm ready." That night, she couldn't sleep. She stepped outside barefoot into the cool midnight air. The stars above were sharp and countless. For the first time in years, she felt weightless. Untethered, but not lost. A soft noise behind her. "Colton." "You all right?" he asked. She turned to face him. Her voice caught. "I don't know who I am without my company, Colton." "You're someone's miracle," he said gently. "And that counts for more." Bethany woke before sunrise. The cabin was still save for the soft creak of timber and the distant rustle of wind through pine. From the window beside her bed, morning light filtered through, in muted blue painting delicate lines across the old quilt. For years, her mornings had begun with phone vibrations, international conference calls, and blood work reports. She used to wake with a start, body, tight breath, shallow already behind. But this morning she woke to silence, and she didn't panic. She stood barefoot and padded quietly to the kitchen. The floor was cool beneath her feet. A note sat on the counter in Colton's careful handwriting. Emma and I are at the hardware store, back by 9. Coffee's in the pot. Below it was a small drawing in crayon, a sun with a smiling face. Bethany chuckled. She poured herself a cup, took it out to the porch, and sat on the top step knees, drawn up beneath the flannel throw she'd come to love. It was the kind of morning that didn't demand anything from her. Not a headline, not a response, not a decision. Just breath. And still. Something pulled at her chest. She didn't hear Colton's truck return. But when he stepped onto the porch beside her, she didn't jump. He carried a bag of nails in one hand, and Emma followed behind, holding a bag of marshmallows. Hardware essentials, Colton said with a half grin, raising the marshmallow bag. Bethany smiled, but her eyes lingered on the horizon. Colton noticed. "You look like you're somewhere else," she exhaled. "I've been thinking about my mother." Emma quietly slipped inside. Colton sat next to Bethany on the steps, setting the bag down with a soft clink. "She passed away 3 years ago," Bethany said. "In a facility I helped fund. A beautiful one. Private chefs, gardens, art therapy. You name it." She stared out at the trees. She died in her sleep alone. I missed the call. I was at a shareholder meeting in Zurich. Colton said nothing, but the stillness around them listened with reverence. I hadn't seen her in 6 months. Bethany went on, her voice steady but low. I kept telling myself I was building a future she'd be proud of, that once things settled, I'd visit. I'd bring her flowers, maybe take her to the coast like we used to talk about. She took a sip of her coffee. It had gone cold, but she didn't seem to notice. She was the kindest person I've ever known. Quiet, unshakable. When I got my first job at a pharmaceutical firm, she wrote me a letter, told me to keep my hands clean. Not literally, ethically. Bethany's smile curved with melancholy. I still have that letter, but I didn't read it again until after her funeral. Colton looked at her gently. "Did she know you loved her?" Bethany nodded, eyes wet. "Yes. But she didn't know I remembered what mattered. Not until it was too late." Colton leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "You can't change what's behind you, but you can choose not to keep running away from it." Bethany turned to him. "Do you ever stop being haunted by what you should have done?" He didn't hesitate. "No, but you learn how to live alongside the ghosts." That afternoon, Bethany asked Colton for a toolbox. He raised an eyebrow, but said nothing, retrieving it from the shed. She spent the next 3 hours on the back porch, fixing a warped screen door. When Colton offered help, she declined. "I need to fix something with my own hands," she said. So he watched from the kitchen window, sipping coffee, as Emma colored beside him. He didn't speak. He didn't interrupt. He just stayed, the one thing Bethany had rarely known from anyone. That evening, over baked mac and cheese, Emma chattered about her art project, building a diorama of a farm. She asked Bethany if cows could eat pancakes, and Bethany, after a long pause, replied that science hadn't disproven it yet. Emma giggled so hard she snorted. Bethany laughed too, and for a moment Colton looked at them like they were already a family and just hadn't realized it yet. Later, as they cleaned up the dishes, Bethany asked, "Would it be all right if I stayed through the weekend?" Colton looked up. "You don't need to ask." Her voice softened. "I do." He nodded. "Then yes. Stay as long as you need." Bethany folded the dish towel slowly. "I don't know what I'm doing next." Colton leaned against the counter. Most good things start with that sentence. That night, Bethany lay in bed, listening to the crickets outside. The window was cracked just enough to let in the scent of pine and wood smoke. Her phone, once an extension of her hand, sat in a drawer off. She stared at the ceiling. Then she rose, crossed the room, and pulled a small folded envelope from her purse. The letter from her mother. She opened it slowly, carefully smoothing its edges. Remember who you are when the rooms go quiet. Do not lose yourself in the noise they call success, and when in doubt, choose kindness. It will never fail you. Tears fell silently down her cheeks. She didn't cry from guilt this time. She cried because somehow, sitting here in this house with peeling paint and a mismatched dinner set, she had finally chosen kindness. And it had not failed her. On a gray Tuesday morning, the sound of tires crunching gravel pulled Colton's gaze toward the end of the driveway. A sleek black SUV, the kind that looked more at home in a Manhattan valet line, rolled to a stop in front of the cabin. Bethany stepped onto the porch, her flannel overshirt pulled tight against the breeze. Her jaw tightened. "Let me guess," Colton said, arms crossed. She nodded. "Temple." Two men stepped out of the vehicle. Both wore tailored suits, polished shoes unsullied by the mud that had begun to thicken at the base of the cabin steps. One of them, tall, clean-shaven with a posture trained by money, approached the porch. "Ms. Lang," he said formally. "Apologies for the intrusion, but your absence has raised concerns." Bethany didn't blink. "My absence is deliberate. The board is calling an emergency session," the man continued. "Temple's stock is spiraling. Investors are demanding your presence. There's talk of a buyout." Bethany's expression didn't waver. "Let it spiral." Colton, leaning quietly against the porch rail, watched her. She looked different now, not just physically healthier, but lighter, freer. This wasn't the woman who collapsed under pressure. This was someone who had learned to breathe without asking permission. The second man stepped forward, lowering his voice. "If you're unwell, we can activate the clause." "I'm not unwell," Bethany interrupted sharply. "I'm unavailable." The men exchanged glances, clearly uncomfortable. "We're prepared to transport you to the city this afternoon." "No," she said simply. Colton straightened. "You heard her?" The first man turned his eyes to him, slow and condescending. "And you are?" Colton stepped off the porch and extended a hand. "The guy who carried her when you didn't." Neither man shook his hand. Bethany exhaled. "Gentlemen, you can leave. I'm not coming back to Temple." "Not like this. Not yet. Maybe not ever." There was a beat of stunned silence. "Then the board will proceed without you," the taller man said. Bethany met his eyes. "Let them." They left without another word. That night, Colton found her in the barn, where Emma kept an old lemonade stand she'd repurposed into a healing booth, a space made of blankets and fairy lights, where she said, only good thoughts were allowed. Bethany was sitting on an upturned crate, staring down at something in her lap. The black card. "I thought I understood power," she said without looking up. "I built an empire, created jobs, launched patents that saved lives. But I've never felt more alive than I do folding Emma's laundry." Colton sat beside her. "Power and purpose aren't the same thing." She smiled softly. "That card, it was never the gift. It was just the excuse I needed to find you." She turned it over in her hands. "It got me into places. Bought silence. Bought loyalty. It made doors open, but it never gave me rest." Colton looked at her carefully. "Why did you carry it that day?" She hesitated. "I was going to end things." Colton's body tensed. "You mean—" "Yes." Her voice didn't tremble, but her eyes glossed with unshed tears. "I didn't see a way forward. The illness, the pressure, the silence, the loneliness was louder than everything else." Colton didn't speak right away. Then he said, "So why give me the card?" She looked at him finally. Because when I was slipping away, I saw someone who didn't hesitate. Someone who didn't see a CEO or a liability. You saw a person. And I thought, if anyone could do something good with the pieces I was leaving behind, it was you. Colton was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached out and gently took the card from her hand. He stood, walked to the wood stove, opened the door, and tossed it in. It curled, cracked, and vanished into ash. Bethany gasped softly. I don't need what's behind that card, he said. I need what's in front of me. The following morning, Emma dragged them both outside before breakfast. She had set up 3 chairs in the backyard facing the rising sun. On each chair sat a mug of cocoa, each labeled with a hand-drawn name tag. Hers said, Emma Bethany's Reed, Sun Lady, and Colton's Hero. Bethany laughed. Sun Lady. She said you bring warm light, Colton explained a bit sheepishly. Bethany blinked back emotion. I've been called worse. They sat sipping cocoa, watching the sunrise spill through the trees. It was a moment that would never make headlines. But it healed something ancient inside Bethany, a wound she hadn't known still bled. Later that day, as Colton was stacking firewood, Bethany approached him with her phone. I turned it on, she said. For the first time in 2 weeks. He nodded. How'd it feel? Loud. She paused, then added, I got a message from a woman at a clinic in Nebraska. She's a single mom. Said her son's heart medication went off the market after Temple's restructure. She doesn't know how to help him now. Colton waited. I want to help, she said. Not as a CEO, not as a nameplate. As me. Then let's find a way, Colton said simply. Bethany smiled, but this time it didn't have the steel of strategy or the polish of press releases. It was real. And it made her look not younger, but freer. That night, Bethany didn't sleep in the guest room. She stayed up late with Emma baking cookies, their laughter echoing through the cabin. Colton stood in the doorway, arms folded, watching them. This not contracts, not labs, not cards, was the cure no one had prescribed. It was presence, it was love, and it was finally enough. 3 days after the black card turned to ash, the invitation arrived by courier. Colton found it on the porch, a navy envelope embossed with silver, heavy enough to suggest importance, light enough to suggest danger. He opened it with his pocket knife and read the contents twice before setting it quietly on the kitchen table. Bethany was outside with Emma, helping her plant snapdragon seeds in the garden. The sun was warm for April, and both girls wore floppy hats that made Colton grin every time he looked out the window. He watched them for a long moment before stepping onto the porch, envelope in hand. She glanced up, brushing hair from her forehead with the back of a dirt-smeared glove. What's that? He offered it without a word. Bethany removed her gloves and opened the envelope slowly. She scanned the contents, an invitation printed on textured cardstock bearing the Temple Biotech seal. A shareholders' summit, emergency session, Bethany Lang requested speaker and guest of honor. At the bottom, one-time offer, exclusive board authority pending your return. Emma looked up. Is it bad news? Bethany hesitated, then smiled. Just old news trying to sound important. Colton watched her closely. He knew the weight of silence better than most, and this one pressed against her like a shadow she'd thought she'd outrun. That evening after Emma had gone to bed, Bethany stood in the living room holding the invitation like it might burn her fingers. Colton sat across from her on the couch, a fire crackling between them. They want me back, she said, her voice low. They're offering full authority, no strings, just me, the seat, and the company. Colton said nothing. Bethany continued. I spent 15 years building Temple. I know how to fix what's broken. I could do good again. Fund clinics. Rescue medications that got buried in cost analysis. I could make it matter. Colton stirred his tea. Sounds like you already made it matter here. Her lips quirked. This isn't about ego. No, he said softly. It's about guilt. She didn't deny it. I can't undo what Temple became, she whispered. But I could steer it somewhere better. Colton nodded. Then the question isn't can you? It's what it'll cost you to do it. She sat down slowly. I'm afraid if I go back, I'll disappear again. The pace, the pressure. I wasn't just tired, Colton. I was dissolving. He leaned forward. You don't have to choose between doing good and staying whole. But you might have to redefine what both look like. Bethany looked up. What if I go and lose this? She gestured to the room, the firelight, the quiet, the unseen threads of connection holding them all together. Then don't go alone, Colton said. She blinked. I'm not telling you what to do, he added. But if this matters to you, us Emma, then you don't have to pretend it doesn't just to keep us safe. Bethany swallowed hard. You'd come with me if you asked, he said. She reached across the table, took his hand. I'm not used to being allowed to ask. You are now. The next day, Bethany made a phone call. She requested no fanfare, no press. She would attend the summit, but not to reclaim power, to redefine it. On the morning of the summit, Bethany stepped into her old world like a visitor. She wore a tailored black suit, sharp, understated, but it fit differently now. She wasn't hiding behind it. Colton and Emma walked beside her through the Temple Biotech entrance. The lobby had been remodeled since her collapse, brighter lighting, new artwork, more plants. But the energy was the same, efficient, clinical, cautious. A young receptionist greeted them. Name, please. Bethany smiled. Bethany Lang. The receptionist's eyes widened. Oh, of course. Conference room A. They're expecting you. Bethany glanced at Colton. Ready? He squeezed her hand. Always. Emma stayed behind with a staff member who agreed to show her the rooftop greenhouse. She waved as they walked away, her pink backpack bouncing. Bethany stepped into conference room A. Silence fell. 12 board members sat around a glossy mahogany table. Charts and documents were projected onto the screen. A few laptops closed. Several jaws did the same. The chairman stood. Ms. Lang. Bethany inclined her head. Good morning. The chairman gestured to the open seat at the head of the table. Shall we begin? Bethany walked to the front but didn't sit. I won't be rejoining the board, she said. I'm not here to reclaim control. I'm here to release it intentionally. Murmurs rippled. I founded Temple to help people, she continued. But somewhere along the way, the mission shifted. Data replaced people. Profits replaced presence. And I let it happen. She paused, let the words settle. Effective immediately, I'm donating my remaining shares to form an independent foundation. One that will identify grassroots healers, caregivers, educators, neighbors, people doing invisible work. People like the man who saved me. She turned to Colton, standing quietly at the back of the room. And I want Temple to match that contribution. Not with money alone, but with action. Every innovation we create must now come with a requirement, measurable human connection. No product goes to market unless we can prove it heals more than just the body. The room was still. Bethany smiled faintly. If you choose to follow, I'll help however I can. But I won't be sitting at this table again. The chairman leaned forward. Why now? She looked him in the eye. Because I remembered that real healing doesn't happen in labs or ledgers. It happens in kitchens, on porches, in the quiet spaces between people who stay when they could leave. That night, back at the cabin, Emma ran into her arms like they'd been apart for a year. Colton grilled fish on the porch, while Bethany sat cross-legged beside the garden, teaching Emma how to recognize basil by smell. Did they clap for you? Emma asked. Bethany smiled. No, sweetie. But they listened. Emma nodded. Sometimes that's better. Later, as the stars came out, Colton handed Bethany a mug of tea and sat beside her on the steps. "You did it," he said. "No," she replied, leaning against his shoulder. "We did." The cabin was quieter than usual. Bethany sat alone at the kitchen table, elbows resting on the worn wood, a mug of untouched coffee cooling between her hands. The morning sun spilled through the window in soft golden slants, illuminating a bowl of apples, a pile of Emma's colored pencils, and the empty seat across from her. Colton had gone out early, no note this time, just a few soft footsteps before dawn, and the familiar squeak of the screen door. He hadn't said much the night before either. Bethany knew this silence, not the peaceful kind they had shared, that kind many times since she came here. This was different. This was the space between words that needed saying and the fear of how they'd land. She wasn't a stranger to silence. She had mastered it, built her career on it. Quiet meetings, cold negotiations, unspoken expectations, that was her domain. But with Colton, silence had never felt like distance. Until now. Emma came skipping into the kitchen, her hair a wild halo of sleep and sunlight. She slid into the chair beside Bethany and yawned. "Daddy said he was fixing something at the old mill," she said between bites of toast. "He always goes there when he needs to think." Bethany smiled faintly. "What do you think he's thinking about?" Emma shrugged. "Grown-up stuff. Feelings and stuff." Bethany chuckled, brushing crumbs from the table. "Did I do something wrong?" Emma asked, suddenly serious. "No, sweetheart. Not even close." Emma leaned her head against Bethany's arm. "Then why does it feel like something's changing?" Bethany kissed the top of her head. "Because something is. But not everything changing is bad." Later that afternoon, Bethany walked the winding path to the old mill. It sat by the edge of a slow-moving creek, long abandoned but still solid. Its beams were weathered silver, its roof half collapsed, but the place had a kind of stubborn dignity, much like the man sitting on its edge staring into the water. Colton didn't turn as she approached. He simply said, "I thought you might come." Bethany stood beside him. Emma said, "This is where you think." He smiled without humor. "She's not wrong." A long silence followed, but it wasn't hostile, just heavy. Finally, Colton said, "You did something incredible back there, at Temple." Bethany sat beside him. "You were right beside me," he nodded. "And now you're being asked to go further. Build the foundation. Speak at conferences. Lead again, but differently." Bethany watched the water. "Are you saying you don't want to be part of that?" He didn't answer right away. "Then slowly, I'm saying I'm not sure I fit." She turned to him, startled. "Why would you think that Colton rested his hands on his knees?" "Because you're soaring, Bethany. And I've built my life at ground level, quiet, steady, slow. You're needed in places I'd never follow naturally. I don't want to weigh you down." Bethany's heart ached at the way he said it, like he'd made peace with being temporary. She reached for his hand. "You don't weigh me down, Colton. You've kept me tethered." He looked at her. "But for how long?" A crow cawed in the distance. The creek whispered by. "I don't know," she admitted. "I'm still figuring it out. All of it. But I want to figure it out with you." He didn't pull away, but he didn't squeeze her hand either. "What if I can't follow you into that new world?" Bethany exhaled slowly. "Then maybe we don't go there right away. Maybe the world can wait." They walked back in silence. Not the fractured kind this time, but one that suggested questions didn't always need answers right away. When they returned to the cabin, Emma was out front with a chalk drawing that stretched across the entire porch. It showed a house, a family, and a sun with an arrow pointing to a stick figure labeled Ms. Bethany. Another arrow pointed to Colton with the word anchor. Bethany crouched beside her. "Why an anchor?" Emma shrugged. Because Daddy keeps people from floating away. Bethany looked up at Colton. He held her gaze, then smiled slowly but deeply. Something in his shoulders eased. That night after Emma had gone to bed, Colton and Bethany stood side by side in the kitchen. "I don't need a podium," Bethany said softly. "I don't need to lead from a stage. I want to lead from where I live." Colton nodded. "And where do you want to live?" She reached for his hand again. This time he took it. "Right here," she said. "But not in hiding. I want to root here and reach out from it. Like a tree." He chuckled. "You're quoting me now. You didn't say it, but you live it." He kissed her gentle and quiet, like a promise sealed without needing to be spoken. A week later, a letter arrived. It was from the clinic in Nebraska. The woman whose son had lost access to medication wrote again this time to say the new foundation had reached out, offered assistance, and was working on a community-based solution. Bethany read the letter out loud on the porch. Emma clapped. Colton smiled. Then Bethany added, "She says she wants to start volunteering, helping others like her." Colton's smile deepened. "That's how it begins." Bethany folded the letter carefully and slipped it into a leather-bound journal she now kept by her bedside. She'd started recording not plans, but people. Not goals, but growth. That evening, as twilight settled over the hills, Bethany sat with Colton and Emma on the porch. Fireflies began to blink in the tall grass. Emma leaned against her shoulder. "This feels like a forever day." Bethany looked at her. "What do you mean?" Emma yawned. "The kind that stays with you even when it's over." Bethany glanced at Colton, then up at the stars. "Yes, I think this one will." Bethany Lang did not walk back into Temple Biotech. Not in person. Not in heels. Not with a press badge or a prepared speech or the expectation of applause. Instead, she sent a video. It arrived in the inboxes of every employee, from the security guards to the senior scientists, from janitorial staff to the highest tiers of the executive board, at precisely 9 a.m. on Monday morning, the day she was expected to reclaim her seat at the head of the boardroom table. The email subject line was simple: "Why I'm not coming back and what comes next." In the video, Bethany sat on the porch of Colton's cabin, the morning sun pouring over her shoulders like a second voice. She wore no makeup, no jewelry, just a soft blue sweater and her usual steadiness. Behind her, birds chirped, and a child's chalk drawing could be seen faintly on the wood. "To those of you expecting my return," she began, "I owe you honesty more than presence. For years I believed I had to be the one making every call, that healing depended on scale, on reach, on speed. But I forgot that healing begins small. It begins when we look someone in the eyes and decide to stay. It begins when we choose presence over performance." She paused a long, quiet breath. "I'm not rejoining the board. I'm not returning to a title. I am, however, offering a challenge. Wherever Temple goes next, let it go. They're with soul. Rebuild systems that put people first, not as patients or consumers, but as neighbors, as children, as mothers, as someone's entire world. And for every miracle drug we produce, let us also ask, who is being seen?" She looked into the camera, unwavering. "I have found something here, not power, not escape, but a kind of peace that doesn't need validation. And I want that for all of us. Because healing is not something we mass produce, it's something we cultivate." The video ended not with a logo or a tagline, but with Bethany turning towards someone off-screen and laughing as a small hand reached up to offer her a wildflower. It was Emma, of course. The entire company watched the video, and Temple changed. Not overnight, not dramatically, but meaningfully. An internal program was launched 2 weeks later, called The Quiet Cure. pairing medical interns with hospice volunteers. A policy was passed to fund local wellness efforts in low-income communities. The first person chosen to lead the new Human-Centered Innovation Division, a former nurse who'd never stepped foot inside a boardroom. Bethany had not come back, but she had never left more of herself behind. Back in Vermont, life unfolded gently. One afternoon, Bethany and Emma painted birdhouses behind the cabin. Emma chose bright pinks and purples, while Bethany's turned out more muted blues and whites, soft brushstrokes she layered carefully, methodically. She found she liked the act of doing something slow and purposeless, something beautiful without profit. Colton returned from the general store with nails seed packets and a new shovel. He kissed Bethany on the cheek as he passed his hand brushing her lower back with the kind of ease that only came from time, from choosing someone in the mundane moments, not just the defining ones. They cooked dinner together now. They didn't plan it. It just happened that way. One stirred, the other chopped. Emma set the table with leaves and stones as decorations explaining each one's special energy. After dinner, they'd often sit outside and read. Sometimes Bethany read aloud from novels she'd once thought frivolous. Other times, she simply listened to Colton's voice rumble through a chapter as Emma dozed beside them. One evening, as the last orange light dipped behind the trees, Bethany spoke softly. "I thought I'd miss the skyline." Colton looked over at her. "Do you?" She shook her head. "Not anymore. It turns out peace doesn't come from rising higher. It comes from sinking in." He smiled. "Like roots." She nodded. "Exactly." There was a long, warm pause. Then she added, "Do you remember what you said to me when I was afraid to lose this life if I went back?" He thought for a moment. "That you don't have to choose between doing good and staying whole." "Yes," she said. "You were right. But I needed to get whole first before I could do any real good." Colton reached over and gently took her hand. "You've done more good from this porch than most do in a lifetime." That weekend, Emma announced she was starting a club called The Helpers. No uniforms, she declared. But everyone has to promise to do one quiet good thing a day. Bethany raised an eyebrow. What counts as a quiet good thing, Emma considered. Like sharing a cookie with someone sad, or hugging Dad when he looks far away in his eyes, or making sure no one eats lunch alone. Bethany exchanged a glance with Colton. "That sounds like the best kind of revolution," she said. Emma nodded solemnly. "And there's no quitting. Once a helper, always a helper." Bethany wrote that down in her journal that night. She titled the page, "The Day the World Got Better," without anyone noticing. At night, Colton often watched Bethany sleep. Not in the way of someone guarding a fragile thing, but like a man who had once believed peace wasn't possible, and now held proof that it was. She still had hard days, days where memory clung tight, or an old ache reminded her of what she left behind. But now she had someone who didn't need her to explain. And she had Emma, whose laughter was the clearest sound in the world. And she had herself, finally, fully quietly returned. The mailbox at the end of the gravel road now bore 3 names, etched carefully into a strip of reclaimed copper. Blake Lang Emma, in that order, as Emma had insisted, because Daddy came first, and Ms. Bethany is still earning it. Bethany hadn't objected. In truth, the progression made her smile. The cabin, once a temporary sanctuary, had become something else entirely. Not a retreat. Not a break from life. But a life in and of itself. Colton rebuilt the porch steps. Bethany repainted the kitchen cabinets a shade of soft sage. Emma planted sunflowers and named each one after a character in her books. There were squeaky doors and windows that didn't quite shut, and mice that occasionally dared the pantry, but no one complained. Because the house, for all its flaws, remembered them. Bethany sometimes caught herself walking slower through the rooms, running her fingers along the banister, humming under her breath without realizing it. She knew where the floorboards creaked and where the wind whistled at night. She began to dream in the quiet colors of the woods. Most surprising of all, she began to write. Not press releases, not quarterly statements, but letters. Longhand, pages and pages, addressed to no one and everyone. To her mother, to the girl she once was, to the women she'd never gotten to mentor, to the version of herself that thought healing had to be loud and permanent and earned. She filled 3 notebooks. One crisp morning in late spring, Emma burst into the living room, holding a shoebox covered in glitter and pine cones. "It's for Ms. Bethany," she cried. Bethany, still in her robe, sat up straighter. "What is it?" Emma beamed. "A trophy." She opened the box to reveal a hand-sculpted award made of a stone, a stick, and what looked like the handle of a broken wooden spoon. "You won the Helper of the Year award," Emma announced proudly, "for being the kindest lady who also knows how to fix a screen door and make pancakes without burning them." Bethany laughed. She hadn't realized she'd needed to be seen in that exact way until she was. "Do I get to make a speech?" she asked. Emma nodded solemnly. Bethany stood holding the trophy to her chest. "I'd like to thank my mentor," she said, looking at Emma, "who reminded me that change doesn't need an audience, just intention. And I'd like to thank Colton, who eats the pancakes even when they're a little burned," Colton added from the kitchen. They all laughed. That afternoon, a letter arrived. Unlike the usual mail seed catalogs and local flyers, this one bore the official crest of the Department of Health and Human Services. Colton handed it to Bethany without comment. She opened it slowly. It was an invitation to speak at the National Health and Compassion Forum in Washington, D.C., an annual gathering of medical leaders, ethicists, and community advocates. The keynote topic, the future of healing beyond institutions. Bethany reread it twice. "It's a big platform," Colton said quietly. Bethany looked up. "I didn't ask for it." "No," he agreed. "But maybe that's why it's yours." That night, after Emma had gone to bed, Bethany and Colton sat by the fire, the crackle filling the silence between them. "I told myself I didn't want to go back," she said. "That I had found what I needed here, and anything more would risk losing it." Colton nodded, saying nothing. "But what if we could bring this with us?" she continued. "Not the cabin, the spirit of it. The lesson. What if the world doesn't need me to return as who I was, but to offer who I've become?" Colton leaned forward. "Then maybe it's time." Bethany hesitated. "Would you come with me?" His eyes met hers, steady, warm. "I've followed you out of a boardroom into a garden through screen door repairs and pancake experiments. I think I can manage Washington." She smiled, emotion catching her throat. "What if I don't say the right things?" Colton reached over, touched her hand. "Say the true ones. They're rarer." They drove down 2 weeks later, taking the long way through the mountains. Emma brought a stuffed rabbit named Dr. Buttons, who served as emotional support and fashion consultant. Bethany brought her notebooks, though she didn't open them until the night before the speech. Colton drove most of the way humming old country songs and pointing out hawks whenever he saw one. They stayed in a modest brownstone just off DuPont Circle, hosted by an old friend of Colton's from his Army days. The city felt sharp and fast compared to Vermont's rhythm, but Bethany didn't retreat. She wore jeans to her prep meetings. She declined a makeup team. She said yes to lunch with a group of hospice workers and no to the pre-conference gala. And when the time came to step onto that stage, she brought no teleprompter, no slideshow, just her voice. Her speech lasted 16 minutes. She spoke of her mother. She spoke of Colton, without using his name, only calling him the man who saved me by not trying to. She described a girl who made trophies out of broken spoons, and how healing, real healing, came quietly. She ended with a simple phrase, "We don't need more heroes. We need more people who stay." The room stood when she finished, but Bethany didn't stay to bask in it. She stepped off the stage, walked out the side door, and found Colton and Emma waiting under a tree. Emma held out her hand. "I saved you a muffin." Bethany took it gratefully. Then this must be the real prize. Colton smiled. "Ready to go home?" Bethany nodded. "I think we already are." 6 months after Bethany Lang's speech in Washington, something unexpected happened. It didn't make the front page of the Wall Street Journal, nor did it trend on social media. But in a quiet corner of Vermont, in a church basement, with flickering fluorescent lights and hand-painted signs. The Antidote Initiative held its first community gathering. There was no red carpet, no press badge, no catered hors d'oeuvres. Just a folding table with potluck dishes, a whiteboard covered in Post-it notes, and 24 people sitting in mismatched chairs, looking nervously at one another. And in the middle of it all stood Bethany, sleeves rolled up, not as a keynote speaker, but as a listener. She'd spent months designing the initiative as a response to a truth that had lodged itself in her heart the day she first sat on Colton Blake's porch. Real healing begins with attention, not efficiency. The vision was simple. Untrained but compassionate people, janitors, bus drivers, neighbors, veterans, lunch ladies, would be trained in emotional presence, paired with individuals in medical or emotional crisis, and asked to do one radical thing. Stay, not counsel, not fix, just stay. It flew in the face of everything corporate wellness had championed. No metrics, no monetization. Just a quiet, structured rebellion against abandonment. The first helper circle in Vermont was a pilot. Bethany called it the Root Program. Colton was the first volunteer. At home, life carried on with deliberate warmth. Emma, now 8.5, she insisted on the half, had begun writing her own stories. They were short, scribbled in crayon, filled with brave animals and wise trees. One story, The Girl Who Healed the Giant. With her quiet eyes made Bethany cry harder than she had in years. Colton read it aloud one night, sitting by the fire, his voice catching slightly at the end. When he looked up, Bethany was watching him with a softness that came from deep trust, the kind built only through shared mornings, small acts, and showing up on hard days. They didn't talk much about labels. There was no proposal, no rings, no speeches. But on a Tuesday afternoon, Bethany ordered new mail with 3 names printed on it. Lang Blake. Colton didn't say anything when it arrived. He just nodded, once, smiled, and quietly went out to install it himself. One afternoon in August, Bethany received a letter. It wasn't typed. The handwriting was shaky, uneven. Inside was a single sheet of paper. "You sat with my son when I couldn't. He passed a week later, but he told me you made him feel human again. No doctor ever did that. Thank you. Margot, Boston." Chapter Bethany folded the letter slowly, holding it against her chest for a moment, before slipping it into her journal. Later that night, she read it aloud to Colton and Emma. Neither said much, but Emma drew a heart on the fridge and wrote under it in purple marker, "Being there is the bravest thing." The Antidote Initiative spread. Quietly, almost reluctantly. Bethany refused to scale it quickly. She insisted it grow like roots, not branches. From Vermont, it moved to upstate New York, then to Ohio, then Oregon. Not every group thrived. Some folded, others merged. But in each place, someone sat with someone who had once felt alone. A retired farmer in Idaho who hadn't spoken in years began telling stories to a 17-year-old boy in hospice. A bus driver in Maine held the hand of a nurse who'd spent 30 years holding hands and never had anyone hold hers. Bethany didn't publish reports or annual statements, but she saved every letter, every scribbled drawing, every email, with a subject line like I thought no one saw me until now. One late September evening, Bethany and Colton hosted a gathering at the cabin. It was small, just the Vermont group. There was a bonfire, a table full of chili and cornbread, and the kind of laughter that doesn't need explanation. Emma wore a crown of sunflowers and carried a clipboard announcing categories for awards she had invented herself. Most reliable hugger, best listener during rainstorms, most improved marshmallow roaster. Bethany received quietest strength. Colton won most surprising laugh. After the ceremony, they all sat around the fire as the stars came out. One of the group's newer members, a young woman named Sadie, turned to Bethany and asked, "Did you ever think your life would end up like this?" Bethany looked at the flames, then at Colton, then up at the sky. "No," she said simply. But I think this is how it was always supposed to begin. That night, as Colton carried Emma inside, already half asleep in his arms, Bethany stayed on the porch. She looked out at the yard, at the empty chairs, the fire dying down, the shadows stretching long. The wind moved through the trees with a soft hush, like the earth whispering back. She wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and stepped down into the grass, barefoot, feeling the chill. She stood there for a long time, listening to the quiet, to the memory of who she used to be, to the home that had taught her to be something else. And then slowly she whispered, "Thank you." It wasn't clear to whom the words were addressed. Maybe her mother, maybe the world, maybe herself. But the wind caught them anyway and carried them forward. The day started like any other, sun filtering gently through Vermont maples, bird song brushing the window panes, and the smell of cinnamon oatmeal rising from the kitchen. But Colton Blake could feel it in his bones. Something was ending, or maybe something was finally settling. He stood outside on the porch, hands wrapped around a chipped mug, watching Emma skip stones across the creek with her usual morning determination. Bethany sat beside him, hair still damp from her shower, her fingers curled lightly around his forearm. She had begun to hum again, not often, not always on key, but naturally, as if her body had remembered joy without asking permission. "You remember when we first met?" Colton asked suddenly. Bethany smiled without turning. "Of course I do. You thought I was some out-of-towner with a broken purse and an attitude. And you thought I was a janitor with too many flannel shirts." "You were." He laughed, then turned serious. "You know what I didn't tell you back then?" She looked at him now, eyebrows lifted. "I almost didn't stop that night. I saw you sitting there, pale, breathing, shallow, and I thought, she's not my problem." He paused. "I almost kept driving. But you didn't." He nodded, eyes misting. "No, I didn't." They sat in silence a while, not heavy, just full. That afternoon, they held a quiet ceremony. The Antidote Initiative had reached its one-year mark. 43 cities, over 5,000 volunteers, hundreds of lives held through grief, healing, confusion, and transition. But here, in the Vermont cabin, where it all began, the celebration was just family, and a few close friends' homemade pies, a makeshift slideshow on an old projector, laughter spilling out of open windows. Bethany stood in front of the group, not with a speech, but with a story. She told them about her childhood in upstate New York, how her mother used to sing old Motown songs while folding laundry, how her father taught her to memorize people's names by the way they said thank you. She told them how she lost both of them in a span of 4 years, how her own body began to follow quietly, methodically, until her spirit did too. And then she paused. "I always thought my cure would come in the form of medicine," she said. "A trial, a breakthrough, a protocol." She turned to Colton. "But what I found was a man who didn't look away." Her voice caught, but she didn't apologize for it. He sat with me in silence. He didn't try to fix it. He just stayed. And in that staying, something in me chose to live again. Later, after the pie was gone and the guests had trickled away, Bethany and Colton walked through the woods behind the cabin, Emma trailing behind them, collecting golden leaves. "Do you think it lasts?" she asked him softly. "What?" "This feeling that we've given something good. That it'll keep growing, even when we're not here to guide it." Colton stopped, brushed a strand of wind-blown hair from her face. "Beth," he said gently, "you didn't give them a program. You gave them permission to see each other, to sit beside sorrow and not flinch." She blinked, tears rising. "And you," he added, "you let them see that being broken isn't the end. It's the invitation." They stood in the stillness a moment longer. Then Emma ran up between them, clutching a leaf shaped like a heart. "For you," she said to Bethany. Bethany knelt, taking it in both hands like it was made of glass. "It's perfect." "No," Emma said confidently. "It's real." That night, Bethany awoke to the sound of rain. She slipped from bed quietly and made her way to the porch, wrapping herself in an old quilt. The forest shimmered under moonlight and mist, each droplet a silver bead sliding down branches. And then she did something she hadn't done since childhood. She prayed, not for healing, not even for time, but for presence, for the strength to keep staying with herself, with others, with the unfolding of this strange, miraculous life. She whispered names: Colton, Emma, every person she'd met along the way who taught her how to breathe again. And then she felt it. Not a voice, not a vision, but a deep, pulsing sense of enoughness, of being where she was supposed to be, of becoming who she was always meant to become. 2 weeks later, an envelope arrived from the Department of Health and Human Services. The Antidote Initiative had been nominated for a national award in community care innovation. It came with a plaque and a modest grant, but Bethany set both aside. Instead, she sent a handwritten note back to the department. "Thank you. But our work isn't innovation. It's restoration. And the most valuable things we offer, presence, dignity, patience, will never fit into metrics. But they fit into lives. And that's enough." Years from now, long after the Vermont cabin had grown quiet again, and Emma had left for college, a child would ask their father, "How did that woman help so many people without being a doctor?" And the father would smile and say, "Because she didn't try to heal them. She just reminded them they weren't alone." Back in the present, Bethany pressed her cheek to Colton's chest, listening to the steady thrum of his heartbeat. She didn't need a diagnosis anymore. She didn't need redemption or revenge or recognition. What she had now was breath. What she had now was love. And in the hush between one moment and the next, she whispered the words that had carried her this far. "Thank you for staying." Colton's arms wrapped tighter around her, and with the wind singing low through the trees, the porch light casting a soft, golden halo around them, they simply stood there, healing quietly together. Sometimes the most extraordinary cures begin not in hospitals, but in quiet acts of kindness, a hand reached out, a heart that chooses to stay. If this story touched something in you, we'd love to hear from you. Tell us in the comments, where are you watching from? It's a beautiful thing, knowing these moments connect us across miles and memories. And if you'd like to join us for more stories that lift the spirit and warm the heart, feel free to subscribe, only if it feels right. Thank you truly for spending your time with us today. We're grateful you were here.